My name is Simon Fowler, and in this presentation, I'm going to be arguing that we should be, as people involved with one-place studies, thinking about studying the Second World War. I know it's a bit alien for many of us because it is, in many ways, still living history. We've all known people who lived during the war, who fought in the war, or experienced the war in various ways, and we're only beginning to think now about the war as being sort of ancient history in a way that we might be keener to talk about the Victorian period or even earlier. But going to be arguing that it is important for one-place studies to be studying the Second World War because of so much we can contribute to the war and its study. The Second World War was, as I'm sure you're very well aware, a total war in which all resources and the whole population are committed. And that's true, of course, for all the nations that fought in the war, American, German, Russian, whatever. We were all citizens were involved in the war in one way or another, whether you were a school child or saving money for the war effort or as a pensioner possibly being involved in your local home guard. So we were all involved in men, women and children. And again, that's a brilliant theme, I think, for one-place studies. It was, as Winston Churchill says, a war done and warrior, and it's our job as historians to bring those unknown warriors into into the limelight if we can. And the whole point, I think, of for Second World War and one-place studies is that we should be using our resources to just study how total war had an impact on the communities in which we live or wish to study and its residents. And that's a big topic, and I think I would argue it's a very important one as well. The key themes I think we need to be thinking about really for the Second World War is how and why the community met the challenges that were presented to it. And the Second World War was a traumatic experience for a large number of people. Communities were bombed, many houses and buildings, other buildings were destroyed or badly damaged. Communities had to live with a greater bureaucracy than they'd expected, in particular dealing with rationing and food shortages in general. Allotments were encouraged wherever possible to grow food for the community, and so on and so forth. So the community had an important role in the war. And how did it react to it? Was it a positive experience? Was it a negative experience? How was it run? How was the community govern itself through the councillors, the council, or in other ways? And also, how did individual families and individual streets, say, meet the challenges of rationing and bringing up children? And the next theme really is how does it impact on society today, and how did the returning servicemen adjust to society? Some of them were traumatized by it. Many of us probably have memories of parents and grandparents grandfathers who were still had night sweats or woke up in the middle of the nights with nightmares about what they'd experienced during the war. And how was the communities rebuilt after the war? This is a picture here of Coventry, which is, as we know, badly damaged during the war, but other communities also suffered badly. The one I'm particularly interested in is Clydebank, which is near Glasgow, which is the most damaged city in Britain due to several raids in May 1941. And from our point of view, for historians, there's a huge amount of research, of course, about the military side of it, but relatively little about the war on the home front, certainly at the micro level that we are experienced as local historians. One-place studies, we were interested in the minutiae of life, and how did that, and in our case, in this case here, Second World, how did the Second World War fit into that pattern? Or how did people at a very local level, deal with the war and the problems and joys that it presented as well? I've got some suggested themes here, and again, it's up to you really, or how you would deal with it. If you're interested in taking it up, I'm sure you've got your own idea, but there are some ideas possibly here that might help you. How did it impact on the community? That's the thing I think I'm possibly most interested in personally. Air raids and air raid precautions, and how did we prepare for the air raids, and what were the consequences of the raids, both emotionally, people being bombed out, and experiences of all around that world, and the physical changes, again, the buildings that were destroyed in the war, and again, there were huge population changes during the war. We've got the Americans troops and European and other Allied troops setting up bases here. We have people moving across the country to work in factories. We have children coming in 1939 and 1940 to stay with families to avoid the bombing, and later on we have communities fleeing the bombing and ending up in supposedly safer areas. Also, you can even drill down it further to talk about what my parents' experiences were, and were they typical of other families, and also look possibly at my street in the Second World War, and or my village in the war, so that again those experiences recorded and will be valuable to historians and family historians and local historians in time to come. And if you're not particularly interested in that way of approach, you might think about looking at children and family life. What was it like to be a child in the war? All the accounts I've read suggested it was actually a great time to be alive as a child, because you had freedom from parental control, because both your parents liked to be working, and you had all these great things to explore, bomb sites and crack collecting shrapnel, and again, understanding what was going on in the world by collecting money for war charities and the national savings, and drawing maps of the war and tanks and aircraft and whatever else. So again, it was a great time to be a child, but also for adults, it wasn't just soldiers and airmen and seamen who won the gallantry medals. A fair number were awarded to people who in air raid precautions, Home Guard, and the sort of fire service, who rescued people from ruined buildings, and in other ways as well. Again, we don't know very much about these people. It'd be really nice to know more. And lastly, the ultimate thing would be, of course, is to celebrate VE Day. What was it like? Did every community have a street party for the children? Probably not, but it'd be interesting to know what was happening in your community. And finally, talk a bit about the sources. There's quite a lot of material available, a lot of it available locally, increasing proportion going on online, particularly with the arrival of the World War II service records at the National Archives and Ancestry over the next 5 or 6 years. Again, they're going to make it much easier to study individuals in the war, but you may well find letters and diaries, and other people might have done oral history. And local studies libraries and local archives might have bomb maps and other records. Council records are quite important. The Home Guard seem to have been very keen to leave records behind of their exploits. So again, there may be Home Guard records locally. And finally, a brilliant source, although heavily censored, are newspapers. So again, lots and lots of stuff available for researchers, and not necessarily always easy to use, but very rewarding for anybody who takes up the challenge. So I'd like to think that this is the start of something a bit bigger, and that people will think about studying the war. And in the words of Winston Churchill, now is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. So happy researching.